Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly. Today on The Detail, it's round 2 of charter schools. Started by the last National Government, abolished by Labour, now they're coming back, and very soon.
The government in this budget will fund 15 new charter schools. It's also set aside funding for the conversion of 35 state schools who may wish to take on charter status. In budgetary terms, it's $153 million over 4 years.
So all up, 50 charter schools. And most of that $153 million goes to the 15 new schools to be set up by 2026. A move welcomed by some, including the co-principal of St Stephen's School, Nathan Dury.
Well, the game's really around flexibility, both in terms of curriculum and the breadth of curriculum that we can now include, which will better reflect the aspirations of us as a people.
But they are so controversial.
This is actually really crazy. You're putting this one set of rules in because you say this is what's most needed and this is going to make the biggest difference for our young people. But then on the other hand, you're saying let's open a bunch of schools where they don't have to follow these rules.
The last time that they did try to establish charter schools, all the independent evaluations said that they made no difference. They didn't do anything more than any other school did.
It's taking public money and put it into private pockets and making money off children.
There was no accountability, only self-reporting, which meant there's no evidence of an increase in the quality of education or that they were meeting the needs of priority learners.
Every New Zealand student deserves a trained, qualified, expert specialist teacher in front of their class. What charter schools will do is take that right away from local communities without consultation.
We'll hear from the head of one former charter school about why mainstream education doesn't work. But some background first with RNZ education correspondent John Gerritsen.
It's basically a privately owned school owned by a sponsor of some form that gets government funding, fully government funded, and they're not allowed to charge fees for attendance. So they're often referred to as a publicly funded private school, but unlike a purely private school, they're not allowed to charge those extra fees and they get the same government funding as a similar sized state school.
And what kind of businesses or who would fund a charter school?
Well, it's pretty varied if you look overseas. Sometimes actually private enterprise is involved. And I know when they were first looking at setting up charter schools here in New Zealand back around sort of 2012, 2013, there was an expectation there might be a bit of that. But largely it's been people who think, I think the education system's failing children in this area or that area, I reckon we could do better. I mean, that's on the face of it. What the sponsors have been saying was their motivation. So for the most part, you sort of seem to have trusts set up specifically to run these schools, or in some cases, it might be an existing trust working with youth who's decided to set up a charter school.
You always need to be thinking of new ways in which students can benefit. And to do that, you need flexibility. And the charter school model allows that.
Our school speaks for itself and our community speaks for itself, and that will have a really positive outcome.
We have 97% of our students achieving at or above the national standards in reading. We have 83% of our students at or above the national standards in maths. And we're around about 63% of our students achieving in writing.
So it's pretty varied, really.
Why are they so controversial? I mean, surely, isn't it good to have an alternative because mainstream schooling doesn't work for everybody?
Well, it depends, I guess, how alternative they're being, and are they really catering for the kids who are missing out, or are they simply getting the best of those surrounding schools and saying, hey, look how well we're doing, when actually they're already getting really good students. So it is quite contested just who they are really serving. One of the big complaints, certainly from teachers and principals, teacher unions about this, is that you're setting up a model that is potentially a profit-taking model from the state education system, and the people are very unhappy about the notion or the idea of making a profit off a basic state service like education. And there's also that fundamental thing around the funding for these schools, the way they're funded in a bulk way. They can spend it as they wish, and one of the biggest areas of freedom is teachers, and the more experienced your teachers are, the more expensive they are. So there is a potential that you'll get schools where they just simply hire the cheapest teachers in order to save the money. So there's a whole lot of potential fishhooks that worry some people, and the extent to which they've actually happened or not, of course, is another matter.
When you talk about the profit, I mean, how do they make a profit? Is this the private company that's funding them that makes the profit?
Yeah, I mean, whoever runs it is allowed to make a profit. They are allowed to be run by profit-making organisations. But, I talked to one former charter school boss or person involved with the charter schools, and he just thought, look, it'd be a really slim chance of making a profit from the money, to be honest. And I know the Education Ministry in its analysis for this round of charter schools said, look, if there was to be profit taking based on last time around, it'd be pretty slim. How
does the funding work for these schools?
Well, these schools are given the same amount of funding as a state school of a similar size, and they also get establishment funding as well. So what tends to happen is when you set a school up, from a new school up, including a regular state school, it will be given, say, a notional role of, 100 kids or 200 kids. So that's what happened with the charter schools. But when they first started off, they had quite a lot fewer students than that notional role, but they still got the same amount of funding. So it looked like a huge amount of funding on a per student basis. The same thing happens though for state schools when they set up. Once they were running, they were no longer getting that establishment money, and so they were being funded at the same rate as a similar sized state school. But the thing is, all these charter schools, or most of them I should say, were really small. So you had students coming from, say, a local primary or intermediate school of 500 or 700 students to a little charter school of 100 children or so. And what happens is that the amount of funding per student for small schools is much higher. So sure, the state's got to pay for a kid to go to school wherever they go to school, but they're paying more if they go to the charter schools, just simply because the schools are smaller.
That's how it works. That is the formula.
Yeah, and especially at secondary schools, because if you look at the average funding on a per student basis, it's across all schools, it's about $10,000, but secondary schools get a higher rate than primary. So you're looking at around $12,500 per student. Now, secondary schools being funded to have chemistry labs, spaces for art and arts, students to do art and technology and so forth. Most of these charter schools don't have those sort of facilities.
Where's the money going?
Well, this is the flexibility. They're able to use that funding in other ways, so potentially to hire more staff. And I know when I analysed charter school annual reports, it was quite clear that the vast majority of them were in properties that were much cheaper than what the ministry was funding them for, or what the property sort of portion of their funding would have been. So they were actually able to use that funding in other ways, which is all part of the flexibility of these schools. But I guess the issue is here, if every school was a charter school, would we want all our schools selling off their rugby fields and so forth, and maybe closing down their expensive chemistry laboratories so that they could use their property funding elsewhere? Probably not.
The establishment funding, how much is that?
It will vary a lot. There was a school up in Northland in Whangaruru. They got a $1.3 million establishment grant. So that's, for example, for a small school. I think it was aimed more at secondary students. And that's the one that actually closed after a couple of years of very, very poor performance. It did use that money, or a lot of that money, to buy a small farm, and that money's still in the hands of the trust that actually set up that school. It has not come back to the Crown.
Oh, and it's got nothing to do with any kind of schooling or education?
Well, they still exist as a trust, and I believe they have, last time I looked, they have a sort of an educational purpose. But there was a strong push in 2016 to actually get that money, get that land returned to the Crown. It never happened.
They are controversial, and there have been some negative stories about them over the years. And I'm just wondering, is that why it's been so difficult for us to get interviews, or even, we thought we had a tour and an interview lined up for Vanguard School, and they cancelled at the last minute. Is there some wariness by the schools?
Speaking generally, rather than about the school particularly, it has been very hard over the years to get the people involved with charter schools to talk on the record, or even talk at all. Often my phone calls don't go answered. And I think, they are nervous about negative press. And because there's so much controversy around these schools, so much criticism, there's a lot of attention. And, you look at some of the Education Ministry reports about how these schools went and so forth. It's pretty clear that you needed to strike a balance where you weren't overburdening the schools with so much scrutiny that they couldn't do anything. So I think in the first round, actually, they were exempt from the OIA because they were feared that, the government was worried that basically people like myself would be hitting those schools with so many OIAs they would be able to put their heads up. So, there is a high degree of scrutiny, and I think they're pretty wary of journalists as a result.
Well, one principal who has agreed to speak to the detail is Raewyn Tipene of Whangarei's Te Kapehu Whetu. A charter school under the previous national government relabelled a special character school under Labour like an integrated school. Its role has plummeted by 3/4 in that time, around the same time as the NZQA found that its teachers' judgments on internal assessments were wrong in a lot of cases, resulting in the level of achievement falling dramatically. Raewyn says she has returned as a principal to rebuild the school, but no firm decision's been made on returning to being a charter school.
What I've said to everyone is until we really see the detail in the policy, we won't be able to make a decision because we're waiting on quite a substantial build program. If it's affected, we may not move. If it's not, then probably very likely we'll go back to charter school.
Currently, are you a special character school or are you... Yeah. What does that actually mean, Raewyn? What makes it different to being a charter school?
The charter schools, they're totally different, but special character means that we come in with a kaupapa that's different from mainstream. So mainstream, you can normally just roll on up and you know what you can expect. With special character, and particularly ours, it's built around the idea of Te Kapehu Whetu, which is waka, haurua, and using the 28th Māori Battalion as a base for our kids to know about themselves. So it's quite specific in terms of you turn up here, you know that you're going to be linked to those two things.
Interesting that you talk about the 28 Māori Battalion, because I believe some of your children are over at Casino as we speak, marking the 80th anniversary.
Yeah, it's the third time that we've sent a crew over. They are part of what we call our Leadership Academy of A Company, and we honour the 28th A Company men from the north. At the time of forming our charter school back in 2010 for the academy, a lot of Māori boys were failing, very much like what we're seeing now. There was a lot of crime, a lot of problems, and so we looked for something different that we could link our boys to, and we decided to use the history of the 28 as a way of linking them back to themselves and to the people and men who fought for us, and it's been really, really, really successful.
Just boys, Raewyn, no girls?
Interestingly, when we did the research at the time, it was predominantly the Māori boys who were failing school in Whangarei. So in 2007, 81% of Māori boys were failing NCA level 1, but the statistics worse than that. Most of the boys had left school before they even got to year 11. So they needed something to tie them back to their roots and give them something to look up to, and the 28 Māori Battalion stood out as something we could work with, and we spoke with the last men of A Company and they supported it and they agreed to have the boys come in under them. So that's how we got going.
So does that mean you have a military element to the school?
We do, but what I always say to everybody is we've had nearly 250 boys through the academy. Only 2 have ever gone to join the armed forces. So we use the military to provide structure, whereas it's the women and the girls behind the scenes running everything.
Okay, so you're in the mainstream now. As a charter school, how was your curriculum different? Because, this podcast is about how charter schools work. And so I'm trying to get my head around what makes them different to mainstream schools.
Largely, it's the things that happen around the curricula that make us different. So we are required to do NCA, if not NCA Cambridge, if not Cambridge IB. So we're still doing the same curricula that most schools do, but how we wrap that and how we do that on the day-to-day basis is where it's different. So we had a lot of autonomy in terms of how we wanted to bring reading, writing and arithmetic to the kids, and that had to do with the kaupapa of the school, which is really the charter. And for us, we have what we call the 3 PO, be Māori, be educated and be rangatira. So we spend a lot of time working with the kids on who they are and understanding where they've come from so that they can go forward in life.
If I came to your school today, what would I see that was different, or what would I hear even that was different?
There's a similarity to Kura Kaupapa Māori. There's more Māori spoken. We do more things that are Māori. The big difference is that we expect whānau to front to support what we do, that we're not here to fix problems. We're not here to just get people through NCA. We expect everyone to be part of that journey with us. So it's a lot more personal, I think, and we can do that because we're smaller, obviously.
How many students do you have?
We got 140, but at our height we had 500. I don't think we'll go to that again. That was too much. We'll probably hang around 250, 300 max.
Raywin says high standards will be at the forefront as a charter school.
When you change the leadership and there's everything's about mediocrity and ticking boxes and making sure the ministry's satisfied with whatever they want, and you lose track of the children and you lose track of the kaupapa and chasing excellence, it just starts to dissipate. As a charter school, we were very, very tied to achieving, and when that changed and we went back to people who thought education's about turning up and doing your 9 to 3, teaching whatever it is that is required of the day, and not thinking about the kids and what we're trying to do here and how we're trying to make a difference, that's when things started to, I think, go downhill.
And the teachers, I mean, in terms of autonomy, you get money at the start, don't you? And you can decide what to do with that money, like the way you pay your teachers, the way you spend it.
We were very, very clear that as an absolute minimum, we would be paying people what they would be getting if they were in mainstream. So that's the bottom line. On top of that, if they bring in expertise, say in kapahaka or sports, we would also top that up and acknowledge some of that excellence that they also bring. But as a minimum, they get paid what they would be getting paid in mainstream.
And the teachers all have to be qualified still? Is there a requirement?
Yeah. All those who are teaching to the curricula, yes. But if we were to use, say, the academy, if we need military people to come in and do some of the work, then it's the expertise we're buying in, not the teaching requirement. The teachers of what I would call your normal curricula, absolutely. But those who bring specialist skills, like we have divers, we have had people teaching our kids different skills, they come with those and we would buy those in as we need them.
While not pointing the finger at Te Kapehu Whetū, John Gerritsen says in general there's no clear evidence that charter schools are public money well spent, because there was no independent scrutiny and a chance for the government of the time to do a comparison with state schools wasn't taken up. Associate Education Minister David Seymour has said there will be some scrutiny down the line.
The big question is are these schools actually attracting students who struggled elsewhere and getting better performance for them, or are they just taking kids who actually would have done really well at a state school? And the other thing is you've got to keep a very close eye on things like not just stand downs and expulsions, because, you just get rid of the kids who aren't performing, but also just, quietly encouraging students to leave. I had a parent who had a child at one of the former charter schools last year contact me saying, well, my child's just been basically forced out of the school so that they don't have to put it down as a suspension or expulsion, just because it looks bad on their figures. So you're just going to leave. This is why these schools need very close scrutiny to make sure that we really are getting something innovative, something successful, rather than working the system by, okay, we'll just, nudge these students out because they're underachieving and, we'll, encourage these students to come and attend. It's very fraught. And, of course, you've got to be fair as well, because you don't want to overburden the schools with so much compliance. They can't do their job.
But at the moment, there is no evidence there that the children that they are taking in have been struggling at other schools. No,
there's no independent evidence of that at all. And certainly if the Education Ministry's report was really quite strong on that. It says, and quote, "It remains possible that performance may have been inaccurately or deliberately misreported. Very few elements of the reporting regime were subject to independent checks." Close quotes. Actually, open those quotes again, because here's the next sentence, which is really interesting. "Even positive assessment results are not equivalent to good performance. The standards at best were proxies." So, there's just such big question marks, which is not fair on the schools, because you want to know for sure, are they achieving or not?
If there is no strong evidence, why would a parent choose to send their child to one of these schools?
Oh, they want something different. Sometimes there'll be this personal relationship between the families and the people who are running the schools. Some of them are pretty small. And there's also perception. I mean, people go to a school if they think it's going to go well. And, on the face, if you look at these NCA results, for example, well, they're around the average in terms of school leaver results, so they're not failing.
Should they be much better than the average? Is that the expectation of these charter schools?
I mean, if you're going to spend more, because the thing is, while I was talking about, hey, they're small schools, so they're more expensive, you've also got $153 million being spent on the administration and organisation of this school. So while they are costing more because they're a small school, you've also set up a whole administrative structure to do this. So they better be worth more money, because if they're not, what's the point? Because they are costing more than the regular state system.
I mean, the makeup of the board that is setting up these charter schools, and, it's going to happen in, just under 6 months, is pretty interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's a real mix of very successful business people and education leaders.
Yeah, and what's going to be interesting is how they base their decisions. You've got a whole bunch of former charter schools that will probably want to become charter schools again. I mean, I don't know if all of them will. And it'll be really interesting to see, if that's how many of those applications are approved. What's the benchmark going to be? Are they going to want high-performing schools, ones with a proven track record converting across, or, will they just take them all?
Have I seen stories that said that, some state schools might be told you're going to be a charter school?
Yeah, that's right. That's a really interesting difference this time around, Sharon, and really got my attention. If a school is failing or underperforming, the Education Minister can direct it to apply for charter school status. So the school's board would have to go away and find a sponsor and make an application to the Charter School Approval Board, and that board would make the final decision. But that hasn't been in place before, so it'd be really interesting to see if they ever actually use that power.
Do you think this is going to shake up education in New Zealand?
It'd be really interesting to see if there's a larger number of schools this time around, if they can make more impact, and especially around giving existing state schools the opportunity to convert, because essentially what they're offering is what used to be known as bulk funding back in the 1990s, which is a funding system where schools get all their funding in bulk. So for teachers, property, the works, and the property of the school would actually remain in Crown's ownership. It's not dissimilar to bulk funding in many ways, as I say, which was back in the 1990s, and that attracted hundreds of schools.
And was that deemed successful?
Oh, it depends who you talk to.
That's it for today. The Detail is supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Davina Zimmer and Alexia Russell produced this episode. William Saunders engineered it. Thanks to John Gerritsen and Raywin Tipene. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Ka kite.